We are joined today on Word on the Street Live by an old friend, Mike Podhorzer. And Mike has been a fixture in DC for some time. We were just discussing offices, Mike, and you said you were in your AFL-CIO office for 25
25
years.
years, yeah.
It's amazing. You were the political director. I'm sure a
Right.
lot of people who are tuning in know Mike from progressive politics and democratic politics, and was political director at the AFL-CIO, and has really been a fixture in political analysis and commentary in the progressive movement for decades. And your columns, which I guess began as bulk emails and then became a blog and then became a Substack, and it's called Weekend Reading, and is definitely one of the more insightful pieces of writing that happens that I see on the political scene. And
Thank
we
you.
thought you'd be a great person to have on and talk a little bit about last week. And so, welcome to everybody. I see some folks are pressing the like button. We really, really appreciate that. So please give us a little bit of love. And maybe, Mike, you can get us rolling here with a sort of a top line, your take on last Tuesday's elections. And for those of us who are looking to try to help bring about political change in this country, what does the election mean in your analysis?
Sure. And it's great to be with you. And it's, again, great to see you after so many years. I think uh, you know, the way to think about what happened is to begin by saying that it obviously is great that Republicans across the board were handed such decisive defeats, but it really has to be understood in the context of the last couple of decades, where we have an electorate where you have one set of voters, maybe 30% or so, who are very pro-Trump, very MAGA, they want him. And then you have, unfortunately, only about the same who want Democrats. And our elections are decided by a group of people who are increasingly dissatisfied with the way the political system and economy has been delivering for them in their lives. And as a result, in 9 of the last 10 elections, that's 20 years, and 11 of the last 13, so basically the 21st century, the party that won the last election loses the next one. And so, in a way that our people see the tongue in my cheek, when Harris lost last November, it was inevitable that this Tuesday was going to happen because, unlike the people who were telling us that the last election meant everyone really was becoming more MAGA and Trump, they had really only been out of patience with Democrats. And we just see that snap back now in even like greater amplitude against Trump and all he's doing. And this is why the country is just in crisis. We have a political system that's completely unresponsive um, to the needs, to the felt needs and the actual needs of most voters, and they take it out on whoever's the incumbent every off year.
What does that say to you for 26 then?
Same thing. It'll
If
be the
the
same thing. 25 and 20, just like in 21 and 22, you had Virginia, the election in 17, the Northam had won big. Then Youngkin like swings the state 10 points, and now it swings back 15 points the other way, right? It's just reaction uh, to who won the presidential election.
Do you buy that also in terms of the different demographic groups? I think the big story of last year was more young people moving to Trump, more minorities, especially Latinos moving to Trump. All those numbers seem to have swung back. You think it's just explained by this overall general phenomenon, or is there anything
Right,
more
because
to
no,
it?
it's like and it's one of the sort of cognitive defects of our commentary class, which is that anytime something happens that's surprising, they try to explain the surprise rather than wonder whether their error in judgment to begin with is why it looks surprising, right? That you could look at the swing by, say, Latino voters in 2024 as affirmative movement towards Trump, which should be expected to continue in the future, which is the way almost everyone was talking about it. Or you could look at it as they have lost their patience with Democrats. And that's it, right? And if you thought about it that way, you wouldn't be surprised to see them swing back. And the two groups that swung the most in 24 swung the most in the other direction this time, young voters and Latino voters, because neither was actually endorsing MAGA or Trump's policies. They just didn't like the options. And another part of it too that is is unnecessarily confused by the way um, uh, elections get reported, where when you talk about, say, Hispanic voters moved by X points, all of us mentally process that as if individual Latino voters were changing their preferences. But an awful lot of it is a different set of Latino voters voting in two different elections. And in 2024, and I wrote a lot about this, a lot of the quote swing to Trump was people who had voted for Biden not voting at all, right? So the Trump, like the margin was about 2 million plus a little. If you step back and realize that 640,000 fewer people in just Los Angeles who had voted for Biden even bothered to come out and vote in 2024, you understand just how much that 2024 result was depressed turnout among people who were never going to support Trump.
So, if I can ask, I don't know, Jeremy, if you're frozen or not. Oh, you're not. Okay. I was
It's
worried
just
there for a
rap,
second. I
but it's
got
just
the
so
flash of
interesting.
Jeremy's. So anyway, I'll
Yeah,
throw in
and
one
my
more.
internet connection is not great, so I might lose you at times. If I look frozen, I might well be.
All right. Well, then I'll throw another question on the table, which is, what does it mean for 28 in terms of Democrats starting to think about, who is it we nominate, what kind of policies we push forward? Because you look, for example, at Zoran Mandani and Abigail Spanberger. Last week on the show we were talking about what you really need is a mom burger, sort of like somebody who has, like, which is almost in many ways what Obama was, right? Like somebody a candidate who at the same time can excite the base, bring out a new coalition, get young people on board, use the technology that we have now to really connect with them. And it has this kind of comforting feeling that works for a lot of swing voters and others who are unsure, and has a way of connecting. And Obama, people forget Obama really did that, especially in 2008, where he had this bipartisan unifying outsider message. So I don't know what it says for 28 particularly.
Yeah. So for 28, and I don't think we want to go down here in this conversation, but already between what Trump is doing and what the Roberts Court is doing, we're in brand new territory in terms of how we even run elections. And so it's really speculative to think through what 2028 is going to look like, as if, in every cycle, you have the administration arresting political opponents or, trying to purge voters or all of those things. And so I think it's actually undermining our ability to get out of this moment when we just default to, well, what's the normal politics coming, right? We have to protect whatever we can. That said, I think that a couple things. One, I think the Democrat will have the most um, greatest chance in 2028 is going to be someone who is in no way associated with Democrats now. And that the I mean, that was Harris's biggest handicap. Um, and it's the Democratic Party's biggest handicap because they have a tone deafness to that dissatisfaction with the way that everything's going. Because when they get up and say, we're going to defend democracy or defend, whatever it is, what these alienated voters hear is that their choice is between a fascist and someone who's defending the system that screwed them over. And so you need someone who's like not complicit in that. You need someone who's going to say, you know, new beginning, right? One, again, I want to take the conversation, but I'd like to correct this. In 2008, we have a sense of Obama as having led this amazing Democratic victory and that he reached across all the things you just said.
Yeah.
It's a myth in a sense. It's not a big one, but it's an important one because, in fact, in 2008, he did not do as well as House Democrats. And that's unusual, right? And that big victory in 2008 was all about the crash and about the utter failure of the Bush administration on Katrina and everything else, right? Basically, especially by the time Lehman crashed, like anybody would have won by that amount, right? That's how discredited Republicans were in the fall of 2008. And so I think people infuse that victory with things that were really what was going on and certainly can't be counted on to work in the future.
Let me just drag you back. I mean, this is going to perhaps be a walk down memory lane for our listeners and viewers, but to go one election before 2008 to 2006, which
Yeah,
was this moment when the Democrats really had, the wind at their sails and were able to turn the tide. 2026 is an opportunity like that again. I mean, there's going to be this sense of
right.
dissatisfaction, and it's all going to be geared right at Trump and the
Absolutely.
Republicans.
Yeah,
And, you and I talked a little bit about this offline, about the opportunity that presents for a Democratic Party, but also the mistake that was made in 2006 by the sort of
right,
establishment of the party. Maybe just share some of that wisdom, because I think as we're looking to 2026, understanding what the opportunities missed in 2006 were is
right,
really an important lesson.
right. So it the in 2006, the Democratic Party leadership was extremely arrogant. They thought they knew they were going to win back the House and by doing these are our model candidates, these who are going to recruit. We're not going to waste money on other kinds of candidates and all of that. And as a result, there was a way they picked up 33 seats, but they left at least a half dozen on the table because they didn't, because they really were working to keep resources out. So you had a bunch who came within 3 points in 6 and 1 in 8. Now, not all that consequential because they had a majority both times, but they over managed it. And as political director of the AFL-CIO, one of the sort of exemplifying races there was that a union teacher in Minnesota was trying to win a Republican seat, and we really believed in him. And Rahm and the DCCC said, "Don't you dare spend money. You're never going to win it." And that guy was Tim Walz,
Yeah.
right? And they were keeping him off their red to blue list because they were so smart and thought he couldn't win. So the lesson for 2026 is like, in a wave year, you want as many bets, as many uh, folks out there running races because you just never know, right? And in a way, the Republicans have opened them. I'm sort of calling this a dummy mander potentially, in the sense that they may, in their effort to squeeze more districts out, may in fact have opened up the opportunity to lose seats because they've taken, voters from very, very safe Republican districts and spread them out. And if it is too Democratic a year, that could really backfire on them. Plus, they've like forced California and some other places, so it could really be a very backfiring kind of move. And it
What is-
also means that in terms of like having more races in play, when you think about those gerrymandered seats in Texas, say, there are going to be a number of Republican incumbents who have never faced serious electoral competition, and you just want to be pushing on every race um, because the upside is so high.
Yeah, and I hope our political team is listening to this conversation, Jeremy, because this is 2006 was my first cycle that I was working in Washington. So those always like stand out extra to you. But that's what I keep telling our folks. And as a national security nerd, and this is what I've spent most of my career doing, even 2018, a bunch of my friends, people I worked with in government, like Andy Kim and Alyssa Slotkin, found themselves, or Tom Malinowski. And
Yeah,
we have a whole set of candidates like that again this year that are running in some of these very, what I'd say, borderline districts, R+4,
yeah,
R+5,
yeah,
R+6. Their candidate quality matters a great deal when you're right on the borderline. If you have somebody who can raise a lot of money and can be
sure.
compelling and has a great story, and we need to find those people and invest in them, because that's how we build a much bigger majority.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I wrote this weekend in my Substack on Sunday was called Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I just really think that the idea that there's got to be one answer and one strategy and we need to impose it from above is precisely wrong. And in fact, at this moment, there's just going to be so much in play in 2026 that I think we really have to let that thousand flowers bloom. You remember, I think where we started to first meet was when I was working for Howard Dean, and we had the 50 state approach,
Yeah,
right? And the fight between him and Rahm over that question of do you invest everywhere or do you
right.
cherry pick and mandate from the top? And I'm so on the 50 state strategy side of things and letting all the flowers bloom and everybody pursue the strategies that make sense in their own district.
Absolutely.
So I'm
And
also
yeah, please go, Elon.
No, Mike, I was going to ask you also, in the midst of this, I want to get your take. And I think I can tell where your take is going on all this, but I'm curious, which is, we had this pretty significant victory this week, and then almost immediately a decision by the Democrats to end the shutdown in kind of a messy way, where a number of Democrats appeared to have broken with the leadership. I kind of wonder how much they broke with the leadership. Or whether this was a bit orchestrated, especially if you look at some of the folks who actually voted to end the shutdown. But interested to get your take on it, and again, back to that message of, if you have so many people who are dissatisfied, does any of this Washington stuff even make a difference a year from now? And this whole discussion that we've had this week make a difference a year from now?
I think in isolation, nothing makes a difference, right? We had COVID and it barely made a difference. So, like, how much could the shutdown mean, right? The, what it, but if you think of it as an instance of Democrats doing something to move the conversation in the country to highlight the damage that Trump is doing, then regardless of whether they came back too soon or not, which I think they did, but they just have to keep doing things like this. They don't have a lot of levers of power, but they have to do things, that actually impact the world, that they're showing that they are fighting this, that um, that they can bring attention to healthcare costs or to the other issues that people actually care about, rather than letting Trump dictate the conversation every day. So hopefully they'll have learned at least that.
So I just want to let everybody know that we are here on Word on the Street live with Mike Podhorzer, who is one of the most insightful political commentators that I follow regularly. I hope that you read his materials on Substack and follow him there, and also the many interesting conversations that he has day in and day out on Substack about all of these issues. So definitely worth following. And we're here with
Thank you.
Elon Goldenberg and Jeremy Benamy here in Word on the Street Live. We come to you every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and we are also able to be found now on Apple and Spotify and all the other platforms that you are potentially subscribed to. So please give us a heart, give us a like, and help us move the algorithm so that we get a greater and bigger audience all the time. Mike, I am curious, if you have sort of some larger thoughts on the question of how does we also discussed this a little bit offline. Major moves that have happened in the course of the last century plus in American history, when you've seen actual real movement in American policy, it's a unique and rare moment, whether it's the New Deal or it's the Civil Rights era or others. We are clearly in need of a moment like that. I mean, our systems are broken top to bottom in every conceivable way, whether it's our tax code or it's our voting systems or, you sort of named the structure of our democracy, right? We've got some real fundamental problems. So I'm curious, you have a very interesting historical perspective on what are the conditions that create ripeness for major structural change. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts to share with us on that.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing it up. I think if people tuning in, are paying attention to the debate about what Democrats should do right now, I want to call attention to basically saying, like, what can, like, Schumer or Jeffries or the current Democratic leadership do to sort of steer the boat in a little different direction? That there's not an example in American history of that actually happening, right? When you think about the times when there's been big change, it's been because the massive victories in elections change who the party is, right? If we were sitting here in 1929 and thinking about what should, the Republicans had just overwhelmingly won the last several elections, just that, not even close. And we're sort of talking, well, what can the Democrats do to get back in? Right. Well, you would not have been able to convince them to do the New Deal, right? Because they were essentially a bunch of Southern segregationists, right? But you get the 1932 election, and uh, this is not a verbal typo. In that election, Democrats picked up 97 seats in the House to take their total, to get their majority and get to 313. Right. And so at that point, like, that changed the Democratic Party's mind. Right. And we're seeing the same, we just saw the same thing happen, unfortunately, where for a long time you had essentially the yet unnamed MAGA part of the Republican Party never able to convince McConnell or Ryan or any of those folks to go as far as they wanted. So with the 2010 election, you get the Tea Party and all of that. And today, actually by 2016, when Trump ran, 85% of the people in the House Republican caucus had not been there in 2009, right? They didn't change. In fact, you get in a way that's kind of eerily parallel to what Democrats are doing. In 2012, after the Republicans lost, they did the autopsy, which was the leadership saying we have to change a little bit to push against the right wing in our party and be kinder and gentler towards Latinos and others if we hope to have a future. right? And like they're in the dustbin of history, right? Because that's not how political change happens. In fact, when you see the leadership of a party doing that, it's to sort of circle the wagons and to resist real change, no matter how they characterize it. So I think it goes back to just what we said a moment ago about how we think about 26, right? The way to change the Democratic Party is to have more Democrats who are different and who are going to be aggressive in fighting for what people want.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about the elections. There's so many interesting candidates that are bubbling up all across the country, and young faces and energetic faces, full of ideas, full of good uh, spirit. And so I think this has the feeling to me that we could be on the edge of something that begins to
Hope so. Yeah.
resemble that. Um, well, Mike, Elon and I are going to stick around for a few minutes and
Okay.
talk
Sure.
Israel Palestine. One thing I just wanted to share with folks, it's so interesting to understand your background. I know that we don't necessarily want to get into the whole Israel politics thing, but
Yeah.
we have a lot of folks online who are interested in Israel Palestine, and you have a deep personal family connection there. I don't know if you feel comfortable to sharing
Yeah.
for a minute
Sure.
the history.
No. So my father's side of the family, I mean, he was born in then Palestine. He was in the War of Independence. His father was for quite a while the mayor of Safed. So was a much more important place before like the boom of the rest of it. And because I'm sure many of you know, have been to Israel now, that it's not as vast as the United States. So basically, everyone knows everyone. And so as I was growing up in the 60s and early 70s, we would go back every year and pretty much to visit family. And yeah, we would, because of my father's family, like, yeah, was exposed to both Likud leaders like Begin and Sharon, labor with Perez and Rabin in a way that like that's who you hung out with. And it was a very um I was certainly coming at it from a without knowing the whole thing. But the one thing I've like there's a personal how it affected me personally was to create a kind of tension because at that point here in the United States, we were dismantling Jim Crow and we had the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, and I was very involved in that here, right? And the the way in which a lot of the people in Israel were talking about the we're calling the Palestinian situation sounded very disturbing, and in a way that I think like has projected out into where we are now. But as a kid, it was very like divided in sort of trying to figure it out.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and I'm really was so glad you were able to share that with
Thank you.
the J Street world and the word on the street crowd. And thank you for all of your insights and for
Thank you.
a great
Thanks for joining
analysis.
us.
And yeah, look forward to future conversations. Thanks,
All right.
Mike.
Feeling even
Take
more
care.
optimistic after this conversation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Take care,
Take
Mike.
care.
Bye-bye.
All right, so stick with us, everybody. We're going to spend a few minutes now just chatting a little bit about Israel and Palestine and all the things that are going on. Elon, Jared Kushner is in the country once again. The 20-point plan continues to hang by a thread. It requires day in, day out babysitting and micromanagement. What can you tell us about precisely what is happening? What's probably on Kushner's agenda today and tomorrow?
Well, a lot of different things. First, I'll say, and it's interesting. I was at a get together with a lot of Palestinian and Israeli and American experts earlier this week. So I'll give you just kind of a few themes, and it really does cut together with where things are with Kushner on this visit. The first is, gosh, there are so many complicated things going on, and a real possibility that none of this works, that the 20-point plan doesn't work. We all have to be realistic, and we talked about it before. If you're an objective analyst, the most realistic scenario here is Israel holds half of Gaza, Hamas holds half of Gaza, humanitarian aid gets in and nothing much more. And that's a terrible outcome. It's still very plausible. And yet, there's opportunity like we haven't seen before. And so we have to keep pushing. And that's what I think Kushner and the administration are trying to do. As usual, one of the dangers is you get mired in the muck of dealing with the minutia of the day. And so the minutia of the day, in this case, is what do you do with these 150 or 200 Hamas fighters who are buried in a tunnel on the Israeli side? I think the Americans would like those fighters to have some kind of amnesty deal to go back to the Palestinian side and the Hamas-controlled side, maybe without their weapons. Maybe they agree to leave Gaza altogether. I think Netanyahu was willing to go for a deal, but he's got a lot of political pressure within his coalition, and so he's not going for a deal so far. And I think what the Americans are really worried about is if you don't get a deal, and the deal is you go out and try to clear these guys out, you could blow up the entire ceasefire. That's a massive firefight in the middle of Gaza. And so my hunch is they will get to some kind of a deal that Kushner will somehow explain. So I think or that Netanyahu will somehow explain to his public and somehow be okay with his coalition, because there'll be a lot of pressure from Trump on that, and nobody wants to see the ceasefire fall apart. So
and then we're down to like the last 3 or 4 hostage remains, right? It's I think 4 maybe.
There's 4.
Assumption always was that people didn't know where most of those were, right? That was always the assumption.
No, I think people knew where most of them are, but I think there is an assumption that there's a few that they don't know about. And
no, that's what I mean. Of the 3 or 4,
yeah.
I mean, we're sort of down to that number now.
It's possible that we just, these 3 or 4, we just might not know, or it might be a long time. It's unclear Hamas knows. And so at some point, you got to start moving on and not say, we can't move on. This is, again, if Netanyahu doesn't want to do anything at this point, the answer is to just say, we can't move on until these 3 or 4 are gone. Now, of course, all the next steps are about getting rid of Hamas and over time replacing it with some kind of a security force, Palestinian police force, right. All those things.
Tell us a little bit about that. There's a Security Council resolution, I guess a second draft now that's floating around. What can you tell us about the Security Council resolution?
Things are still very uncertain. There's a Security Council resolution being negotiated. I think we'll get there on the Security Council resolution eventually. The biggest problem is all this is taking a lot of time, and it's understandable that it's taking time. But we have this, oftentimes it's called the golden hour in post-conflict, which is in the immediate aftermath. People are looking around at who is going to keep me secure. And the only folks asserting themselves over most of the Palestinian territory in Gaza are Hamas. And that's because this is all taking a long time. I actually don't blame the Trump administration for this. I think it was important to just get a deal to end the war. And all these things were going to be hard. I do blame Netanyahu and his government because 2 years ago we were having these conversations about how you do this. And it should have been done during the war. And there was a consistent objection by Netanyahu to not doing it because, again, it takes you down the pathway of Palestinians are going to control Gaza, and we are going to need some kind of a plan that ultimately unifies Gaza and the West Bank, and that creates the possibility for a two-state solution. And Netanyahu doesn't want to do any of those things, and certainly his coalition doesn't. And so instead, you just punt on all of that, which is what he did for 2 years. And now here we are. The war is over. Now is the moment to just try to replace Hamas with something else, and it's slow going, and that's very dangerous.
So, let me ask you a devious question, which is, do you think that there is any chance that Donald Trump is trying to push President Herzog to give a pardon to Bibi so that Bibi will leave the scene and we can have a different government that doesn't stand as an obstacle in the way to what he's trying to do?
I think there's multiple things happening at the same time on this one. First of all, let's just say it's all kind of yuck. Can we agree on that?
We can agree on that.
Part of that is, Netanyahu and Trump are kindred spirits when it comes to the issue of their own domestic politics and authoritarianism.
And the rule of law and the idea that there should be any accountability.
Right, and lack of democracy. So Trump has no problem just doing this because it's so consistent with who he is. But I do think he's also looking to do this in exchange for Netanyahu giving him things as part of this 20-point plan and execution of it. And if it actually leads to Bibi stepping aside and a part of this agreement is Netanyahu doesn't run again, then and he's protected, I'm all for it. If that's what needs to happen, I will hold my nose. Like you said, it's yuck, but it's so important for Israeli society to move on. It's so important to actually have a real commission on what happened on October 7th and a real understanding of that, which is all being thwarted right now by Netanyahu. And part of it is he doesn't have anywhere to go. And if his alternative to losing office is being in jail, that's just a terrible alternative. So if the answer is give him the alternative of sitting at home, I'll take it.
So speaking
Unfortunately.
of people leaving the scene,
Yeah.
one of our favorite interlocutors over the last 20 years, Ron Dermer, announced his resignation this week. I guess he's going to go into business with Jared Kushner. Is that what you've been hearing? So I think he's going to be making a lot of money off of all of this. But give us a little bit of your experience with Ron Dermer. Any stories that you want to share with folks?
Sure. And yeah, again, the whole Kushner and Dermer going into business together.
It's unbelievable.
It goes back to the same thing. We've said this over the last few weeks. There's the corruption. There's the really problematic behavior on rule of law. For whatever reason, these interests seem to be working in a way that might be moving things in a positive direction on the immediate Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Embrace that while being very cognizant of all the really horrible things and problematic things that are going on. In terms of Dermer, yeah, it's a historic. He is Bibi's brain, people often say, right? And he's really been his right-hand man for years. For me, it's as strong of an indication that Netanyahu might be thinking of a way out too. Like these two things are totally correlated. Now, Ron, it's a very difficult character, really tough. Every meeting, he will talk at you for most of it, and he'll have lots of opinions, often channeling Netanyahu. By the way, it's very similar. Netanyahu has exactly the same style. But I do remember 2013, as we were working on the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, sitting and having a drink one evening at the American Colony Hotel in East Jerusalem with some of the other members of the negotiating team. We heard Ron was going to be the American ambassador to the United States, the Israeli ambassador to the United States. And the thought process was, well, actually, maybe this is a really good idea because we want Netanyahu's closest advisor in Washington that will help. I think that was probably, in retrospect, a really bad take.
That was off. That analysis was off.
Ron became really the driving force behind this entire strategy of forget the American Jews, forget the left, forget Democrats. We're going to engage with the right. We're going to engage with Christian evangelicals, Orthodox Jews. That's all we need. Let's take this hard right strategy. I understand American politics. He was American, spent most of his childhood in the United States, really viewed it that way, and was also the mastermind behind Bibi Netanyahu going and giving this speech to Congress against Obama back in 2015 in the midst of the negotiations on the Iran deal. Ron was ambassador here. And that was really, when you look at the trajectory of the last 10 years of the U.S.-Israel relationship, it was all building to that. Where it really broke, the first big break, that was
the single most important moment of the last decade, yeah.
And then Gaza, right? It was like that was step one, and Gaza was step two. And I'll tell you, Jeremy, I was meeting just a month or two before with a senior Israeli diplomat from the embassy. He was a career person. And we were talking about, is Netanyahu going to fight Obama publicly over the Iran deal? This was like January or December of right before Bibi in February made the decision to come. And the promise from this Israeli counterpart, I don't think he was making it up. I think this is what he genuinely believed. He looked at me when I asked him this question. He said, there is not a world ever where the Israeli prime minister will go directly against the American president and interfere in American politics on any issue ever like this. And
Oops. Another brilliant moment in analysis, right?
Yeah. So, but this is, this is what
in addition, so we've got Kushner's there. You've got the request for a pardon. You've got Dermer leaving. You've got the ceasefire holding by a thread. At the same time, you've got basically a turnstile at the West Wing because the East Wing doesn't exist anymore. So you've only got the West Wing. And you've got presidents of this and that and the other country cycling through on a daily basis. Last Monday, I guess it was Ahmed al-Shara from Syria. I want to highlight for folks that you had a great webinar on Friday, I think it was, that looked at the state of play vis-a-vis Syria and Lebanon. So for any of our listeners who are interested in a much deeper dive into the situation in Lebanon and Syria, please go to the Word on the Street homepage, which on Substack is becoming more and more of an information hub. You'll find all of the latest webinars, all of the discussions, the columns that we're writing, the policy papers. It's all there. There's a great webinar that you led. I don't know if you want to say a word about Syria and Lebanon right now, given the Shara visit.
Sure. And I should also say, while we're doing that, we're also starting to bundle a bunch of these products and send them out to you. You'll always get Jeremy and my columns direct, but we're also trying to get more of this material out to share with our readership. In terms of Shara, historic meeting. Just pull back for a second. The guy who just a few years ago was running Al Qaeda in Syria, and before that was aligned with ISIS, showing up at the White House for a meeting. Kind of wild. And not just that, having bipartisan support and everybody thinking, this is a pretty good idea. And
he had a $10 million bounty on his head, right? I mean, just like months ago, he had a $10 million.
It's wild. And so I think
does that mean Maduro? Are we going to see Maduro at the White House next year?
All right, we'll see. I think one at a time. I mean, look, Yasser Arafat was on the terrorism list, 3 weeks before he ended up at the White House the Rose Garden for the ceremony in '92. So, some of these, it's the old saying: you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies.
Right.
And so, I think it's Shara has been nothing but pragmatic so far in trying to move towards the United States. He joined the counter-ISIS coalition on this visit. This is, I think, all positive. The Trump administration has done the right thing in removing sanctions on him. That's still a process that's ongoing. You still have to take a wait-and-see approach with him. That was one of the themes, but embrace. And the other thing is the situation in Syria still incredibly unstable. Even though he's showing, I think, solid leadership so far, he doesn't have unified governance over the entire country. The South is a lot of conflict with Israel. The North, the Kurds, and a lot of instability there. Turkey, there's so many challenges in Syria. And as we've seen from previous Arab Spring experiences, it doesn't always lead to a good outcome. But he is doing the right thing so far. He is making the right noises, and we should be incentivizing that, which is what we're doing.
And we don't have a lot of time to get into much more, but I would flag that Lebanon is also just an exceedingly dicey situation right now, and really important for the United States to be heavily engaged there as well. And so that was covered in your webinar as well. So in addition to Shara's visit this week, next week we have Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, coming through. And again, 6-7 years ago, one might not have expected to see him at the White House, but here we are, and it looks like we might be on the verge of signing some very serious security cooperation agreements, some guarantees. What insights do you have as to what's been happening with the Saudis? And I guess Kushner was in Riyadh before going to Israel.
Yeah, and I think he just went back actually for some. Oh, actually, yes. I'm not sure exactly when he went, but that was just reported today on this meeting. I think we'll have a series of deals of some sort. I think we'll probably have a security deal very similar to the one the Qataris got about a month ago, which is not, the Saudis would really love is, Senate approved treaty security assurance. They're not going to get that, but they are going to get some kind of a security commitment from Trump. I think you'll also have a lot of money flowing in terms of Saudi investment, a lot of joint projects, announcements of Saudi investment in AI, follow up on Trump's visit in May. The investment in AI, so people understand a lot of what you need for artificial intelligence, these huge amounts of places to store and process data, these huge computers and these huge models. The Gulf is the perfect place to do it. These things are expensive. You got a lot of capital in the Gulf. These things require a lot of energy. You have a lot of solar, warm weather, and cheap oil in the Gulf. And you need land, and there's a lot of desert land in the Gulf. These are the perfect places to do this. So this is the kind of investment, and this is really, for MBS, this is the first priority, right? Is investment in his future and tying himself to the American economy. Question is, what does it mean for the Palestinians and for the Israeli-Palestinian issue? You and I were talking about this earlier, Jeremy. And I'm actually I think at this point, it's not necessarily bad to separate these things out. Let Trump do these deals with MBS on all these other issues. Uh, Tie Israel normalization to the Palestinian issue, which is what the Saudis are doing. And as long as they continue to do that, that's exactly how it should be. Their biggest investment, their Saudi's biggest interest is they're tied to the American economy and security. Our biggest interest is Saudi being tied to the U.S., not to China, and investing in the U.S. We want them to normalize with Israel. They want a Palestinian state and a pathway to a Palestinian state. Fine, put those two issues aside and work on that. And the best way to do that is to have the Saudis really get engaged in the Gaza process, have them putting money into Gaza. Maybe, I don't think they're the country that's going to put forces into Gaza, but political clout into the 20-point plan. And that's what starts to build relationships between Israel and Saudi, and eventually you get there. But I think it's okay. In the Biden administration, we had this formula of tying all these things together. I'm all right separating out the U.S. Saudi relationship at this point from the Israel-Saudi relationship and making those two separate things.
Yeah, I'm very, very concerned about sort of the Saudi-U.S. relationship just moving forward without being able to get the kind of engagement that I think we need the Saudis to have on the Israel-Palestine front. And if they get everything that they wanted from the U.S. without having any give on the Palestinian front, I do worry about that. But I hear what you're saying at the same time. One place where I think the rubber's going to hit the road is if anything is required in Congress. I think it would be a lot easier to get things through Congress if U.S. Saudi arrangements are tied to U.S. Israel and Israel Saudi understandings as well. So, I think from a congressional point of view, if these things don't require congressional approval, then the White House can just move ahead with them. But anything that would require it, I think you probably need an Israel-Palestine component to it to make it saleable to enough folks in Congress.
Yeah, I think that that's right. If you start going down, and it's interesting with the Israelis. I heard somebody make this. Actually, a Saudi academic made this point in a discussion I was in recently. He said, "Look, the Saudis, they want them." The way he described it is they want the milk. They want the cooperation with Israel under the table on security issues and maybe some economics, but really that's not that big of an incentive for them. But they're not really sure they want the whole cow. Why would you need the whole cow if you could just get the milk? And I think right now they're looking at it and if you think politics around the Israeli-Palestinian issue are rough in the United States with the next generation of young people have been mobilized by what's happened, try the Arab world and what they have seen over the last couple of years. There's been a real transformation there where there was a new generation coming up that saw the whole Israeli-Palestinian thing as that's my mom and dad's problem. Frankly, that's how MBS saw it versus King Salman. The talk was always, you go back 2 or 3 years, it was always, once King Salman dies, MBS is just going to normalize with Israel because all this Israel-Palestine stuff is old and really like not what the next generation is focused on. And this is what he cares about. And Israel is exciting and new and interesting and there's technology in there. After the last 2 years, that's not how he's looking at it, right? He realizes now this is a major liability for me and a major headache. I will do it, but only if I get what I want, and that includes the Palestinians, because what I want is a stable region that is perceived as stable, no more of these kinds of fights, and then we can all move ahead and turn all this oil and capital wealth into a future for Saudi Arabia that's not oil dependent and is technologically and economically tied to the United States. But for that to happen, I've learned my lesson. It could all go boom in a second if things go crazy between Israelis and Palestinians, which is what's happened.
So we're about to wrap things up. I will note, I saw a flash across the bottom of the screen there in the comments, a note that we've spent a lot of time talking about Gaza and about other issues in the Middle East, and we haven't mentioned the words West Bank. I do want to make sure that it's really clear to our listeners and viewers that the situation on the West Bank is about as dire and explosive as it's ever been. The amount of settler violence on the West Bank is at absolute record levels, and not a day goes by where you don't see news reporting now that is breaking through to more and more mainstream coverage about attacks on Palestinian villages, and they are getting more violent and more massive. And so I just want to assure folks that J Street and Elon and I are very much tracking this and engaged on this. There is something called the West Bank Violence Prevention Act, which we are really advocating in Congress, that has now over 100 co-sponsors in the House and I think 20 in the Senate, and is all about getting the U.S. to sanction the entities that make a lot of these settler gangs and settler businesses possible, because they're connected to the financial system. And if you sanction them, it disconnects them from the financial system. So, Elon, I just want to make sure we end on a note where our listeners and the J Street world understands that we are fully aware of what's going on the West Bank, and no one should take their eye off that.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I'll make one more observation here, and I'll tie it back to the West Bank. This is just one other thing we've seen over the past couple weeks, and I think it maybe gives me a little hope down the line for something to be done in the West Bank. One thing I took out of my discussions over the past few days is very interesting phenomenon where the U.S. now is more militarily engaged on the ground when it comes to Gaza, but really when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with this new center that they've developed where we have CENTCOM, where we have them starting to take over things that have traditionally been done by COGAT, the Israeli arm that administers the territories. It's a much more hands-on American approach than we've seen. And Netanyahu is letting it happen, which is kind of shocking, and Trump is doing it, which is also kind of shocking. One thing I've heard from Palestinians is, actually, this is a good thing. The more we can have the U.S. military doing this instead of the IDF, the better off we are. And actually, one thing I've heard from a bunch of Israelis is, this gives me a little bit of discomfort because I'm not sure we want the Americans this involved. They're going to start getting into all kinds of things that we prefer to just run on our own. That is just applying to Gaza right now. But as this process moves forward, advocating for, well, if you're going to get into that business of, doing things like figuring out what goes in and what stays out, like, that doesn't need to just apply to Gaza. That needs to apply to the West Bank too. If you're going to be working hand in glove with Palestinian security forces and training them to go into Gaza, and you have much more American political attention on that, it's got to be the West Bank too. And Palestinians need to be making that point. Western countries need to be making that point. Arab countries need to be making that point. And we're advocating for it, as you said, Jeremy, every day. So I think there's opportunity in this moment, even though the world is facing on Gaza, to new dynamics that are developing in this fluid moment, that I want us to be able to point at the entire problem, not just at the first problem.
And the international engagement part of this is really important too. The 20 countries that are in the CENTCOM headquarters, the UN Security Council resolution that is going to have global backing behind it, the Macron-Abbas work on the realization of a Palestinian state that they have not stopped working on. There was another conference this week and another paper published on that by the French together with the PA. So there's a focus on these issues that has been missing, and a realization that you can't just manage the conflict. We've got to try to solve it. So hopefully out of the horror of these last couple of years, maybe over the course of the next year plus, there can be some real progress, and that's going to be our goal. So thanks to everybody for joining us once again on Word on the Street. Please do like us, give us a little bit of love there with the heart, and make sure that you tell your friends and family. You're going to press the heart yourself now, aren't you?
Oh, that's right. There I did. I just did.
There you go. That was your little heart. One little heart. All right, there you go. So help us to grow the audience. Wonderful to see hundreds of you joining us now every week. Thank you so much, everybody. Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern, and check out the information hub that we're creating at the Word on the Street Substack for all the webinars and all the writings that we're doing. Thanks, everybody. See you in our new podcast studio next week, Elon.
That'll be exciting. Or in a couple of weeks. Let's
I'm not going to
see you from our houses in a couple, for the next couple of weeks while we go through this very complicated move. And then
All right. Take care, everybody.